Okay, we have everybody back. We're just waiting for Sam. Okay. Oh. This makes up for the fact our last 2 planning meetings weren't very long. Okay, so if everybody hates me, why does everybody hate the chair for something like this? You know.
Let's just go. I don't have very much longer. I'm out of here.
I realize we're waiting for Sam to get the live stream going.
We just have to wait because there's a bit of a lag between it's showing live here, but it doesn't show live on site just quickly. So
thank you, Director, for that. And we're live.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. With that, we'll go right to Savas. You were in the middle of your PowerPoint or starting your PowerPoint.
Yep, I'm going to start it right now and get right into it.
Good.
So let me just, okay, there. So like I said, I do have some, I guess I'd like to preface this by saying that the applicants have accepted the proposed bylaw as it's currently written to a degree. And I don't want to be one to sort of stand in the way of progress here, but I do feel as a professional planner, I need to provide at least my, the opinion that I feel is the most valid, most in the plan, my planning opinion that I think is good planning. And I do have some matters sort of that concern me about this application. I just want to share with the committee for their consideration. So you've heard obviously a lot about this application from Richard's report and from his presentation. I don't necessarily need to go over all those matters again. I will like to say that as he did mention, the application was approved at the Committee of Adjustment this morning for the consent, and a big consideration was that the size of the proposed lot was consistent with a lot of the other development in the surrounding area. And just to confirm that, this is the proposed lot right here on Bridgedale Court. Is proposed to be cut in half, and you can see that a lot of the development in this area is all pretty much consistently the same size as what's being proposed. So as mentioned, public meeting was held last year on this. There was 3 main issues that came out of this public meeting: site serviceability, which as mentioned, Dan Duke's report has reviewed and has determined the property can be serviced. Wildland fire risks was raised by the district, and we looked at the mapping a little bit closer to determine that the wildland fire risks did not in fact encroach onto the proposed lot, so that matter has thus been resolved. And the last one being the impacts of the development on the wetlands as shown in the official plan mapping, the constraint mapping. So staff has recommended and through basics and deliberation back between the applicants and staff that a 5-meter buffer be proposed along the back of the property. It was originally proposed to be a 30-meter buffer, and it's being reduced down to 5. And that's, I think, where my concern is. So as you can see from this sketch, that's where the official plan, this is taken from the GeoHub GIS system. That's where the official plan says there's a wetland on this property. Now, I know you guys are probably well aware of this, that the official plan mapping is not necessarily always 100% accurate in terms of wetland features. A lot of these times, these features are just drawn on using aerial photography as a guide as to where these features are, and they're later field truthed when applications come forward. So you can even see here, the wetland is actually shown going across the entirety of these 2 properties, and these 2 properties are fully developed with dwellings. And so, like, obviously, that shows that there's some inaccuracies when it comes to this this feature. So, looking at when we were asked to evaluate this wetland, one of the first things that I normally do is I look at the aerial photography and see what this line is drawn to see how this wetland feature sort of appears on site. And you can see where this red line, this being the subject lands, this red line demonstrates where that, approximately where that OP mapping would show that there's a wetland. To me, it was right away suspect that whether or not there was actually a feature there in that location. And asking the applicant, he was not aware of any wetland feature that he remembered at the sort of near the back of his property. So one of the things that we did was we went back to staff and hoping that to avoid doing an ecological review for something we felt like was not necessary for this application, we asked that maybe they reduce their recommendation from a 30-meter buffer, which would make the property completely unserviceable, to a 15-meter buffer, which would have been tight, but would potentially have worked in order to move this forward without doing each ecological review. That idea was rejected. The 30-meter buffer was sort of the worst case scenario, and that's what they wanted to move forward with. So we said, okay, fine, we'll do an ecological review on it. The first thing we looked at with Hannah Wolfram, we were sent this map. So this is what the Ontario government shows this wetland to be on the lands behind it. As you can see, the Ontario government's website, it shows the wetland being about 100 meters from the back of this property. So based on what we were seeing on aerial photography, and based on what Hannah's showing us here, this further confirmed that we didn't think that we would see a wetland feature that close to the back of this lot. The official plan speaks to 30 meters being sort of the distance where when development comes within 30 meters of a wetland, that we need to sort of demonstrate the protection of that feature. So what we asked Hannah to do, and it's because these are private lands, so she can't trespass on them. We asked her to look at the proposed lot, on its lot itself, obviously, and without trespassing on the neighboring property, to see if she can visually confirm that she does not see a wetland within 30 meters of the back lot line. And that's what she did. This is her conclusions. I won't necessarily read it out, but basically what she says in her report is that the field investigation determined that she did not see what appeared to be a wetland on or near the subject lands. And she based that on her investigations on site, boreholes on the property itself, and just doing a visual inspection, looking at the species of the trees and the vegetation that exists in that general community, and made a determination based on that. And she'll be able to elaborate on that a little bit more. So what happened is staff disagreed with her approach and basically rejects the idea that there is no wetland behind this property within 30 meters of the subject property. So the whole idea of a buffer being applied to the back of the subject land is still on the basis that staff disagrees that there's no wetland there, or at least not in that location. They're going with the official plan mapping located wetland boundary and applying a buffer to that, which spills onto the subject property. So, it's based on, from what I understand, and maybe Richard can speak to this later if you have questions for him, but it's based on his site visit to the property where he saw some standing water on the lands behind the subject property. Now, we were in a period of a lot of rain in that time when he visited it. And Hannah Wolfram provided me, in which I provided him, an explanation as to why there may have been some pooling of water there. The area behind the subject lands is a lower topographical area, and it could very well have just pooled up rainwater for a temporary period of time, which would dissipate over time, and actually not representative of an actual wetland, but mainly just of a pooling area for rainwater. I sort of hoped to be able to dispel that as well I visited the property in a time where we weren't having too much rain and found that the location that the standing water was found was completely dry. So it sort of represented, it aligned with what Hannah Wolfram was explaining as a possibility of why she saw some standing water on that property. So as I mentioned earlier, district had raised comments that sort of related to these matters and sort of triggered the need for these investigations as well. Well, since then, district has in fact revised their comments. I don't know if they were included in the staff report. I didn't see them. I didn't see them represented or at least presented to the committee, so I don't know sure if those comments came through. But basically on September 9th, so last week, these comments were reissued, and they were reissued in a way that because of there was an actual mapping error on what the depth of the properties in that area actually were. And they were being shown as being about 20 meters deeper than what they actually are. And Terranet and MPAC revised the parcel fabric, sent it back through, and that updated all the mapping at the district level. And as a result of this, they reissued their comments and basically stated that they no longer needed the wetland evaluation or the wildland fire evaluation. All they needed to show is that they demonstrated that the site is serviceable, which we have shown through the Dan Duke engineering report, and that they would be satisfied. So I just wanted to point that out to the committee as well, that they have in fact, I guess, rescinded their previous requirements for that wetland evaluation. So as a result, I feel like applying a buffer to the back of a property when we have an ecologist saying that they don't see a wetland, when it appeared suspect that there was a wetland in that exact location. I don't see the appropriateness of that. What we're doing is we're applying a protection to a feature that has been demonstrated that is not in that location, and it's within, beyond 30 meters, at least at a minimum beyond 30 meters from the back of this property. So I'm hoping that the committee will take that into consideration here. There's a possibility here that we could remove the need for a buffer altogether. But like I said before, because the applicants have agreed with moving forward on this, on the basis of moving forward, they've been dealing with this issue for over a year now, and they're hoping that this, by accepting this, that this would sort of put an end to everything and allow them to move forward with their potential project here. So on a final note, there is also that matter that has been raised of requiring a visual buffer between this property here and this property here. And one of the things I wanted to raise is, like, no other property in this area has a requirement for a buffer along their side lot line. And yet it seems like everybody has a significant amount of trees still found on their lot. The applicants don't wish to clear cut their property. They don't wish to create a situation where all the trees would be removed and we have left with a barren looking property. But that said, applying a 3-meter buffer increases their side yard by twice the amount that's already permitted on the site. And it has the ability it has the effect of protecting the neighboring views to the subject lands when they actually have a significant amount of vegetation on their property as well. I feel like it's unnecessary to provide that buffer, but as a minimum, the applicants has asked me to ask the committee if they would consider, rather than a 3-meter buffer, a 1.5-meter buffer, which just basically represents the existing side yard requirement for the zone, and therefore would basically not have the effect of increasing the side yard setback on the subject lands. So just basically in conclusions here, before I ask Hannah just to add a couple more words in about the wetland issue. The applicant has accepted us on the basis of just moving forward with it. Because the proposed bylaw actually allows the site now to be serviced, so they're willing to accept that if that is what the committee feels is the most appropriate bylaw to pass. In my professional opinion, I think because of the lack of evidence of there actually being a wetland behind the subject lands in your vicinity, applying any buffer along the back doesn't seem appropriate and doesn't seem like good planning. And finally, just the same basis of what I just discussed about the 3-meter buffer, I don't feel that given the circumstances of the neighborhood, given the amount of vegetation that exists between the two dwellings, the dwelling on the neighboring property and the subject lands that are being proposed to be created, that there is necessity for a buffer there too. So that's really all I have to add. I'd be happy to answer your questions, but if I could just ask that Hannah just add her opinion on the wetland and how she came to her conclusions, that'd be really appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, Savas, quick question. I appreciate the presentation, and I think it's great that Hannah's there. Will Hannah be reconfirming information that you've just covered with us, or is it okay to just know that Hannah is there if anybody has a question of her?
I think that's fair.
Okay, you've sort of covered everything that
Sure.
Hannah, and to the point of presenting her opinion, so that's great. And I think it's good knowing she's there. But
Okay.
Given we've been here for a long time, I think committee would appreciate the fact that if they have a question, it's great. She's there. All right.
That's fair. No, I think that's a good approach. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. So with that, I will ask committee if you have any questions of Richard or Savas with respect to the application. Just in the meantime, given what was presented by Savas, Richard, I would ask you if, knowing that the district has altered its opinion, if that has had an impact on your opinion, or why you feel it necessary to have that buffer in the back as you're proposing.
Yes, thank you. Good question. Through you, Madam Chair. So I guess the wetland is proximate to the property. and the proposed development is creating a lot that's deficient in area. When you think of wetland protection, you think of the adjacent lands around a wetland. And typically the adjacent lands around a wetland are the 120 meter zone around a wetland. And you look at that area and you say, is the development within 120 meters likely to impact that area? And in this instance, I think the district did change their position on the location of the wetland in relation to the property, but they didn't really comment on the technical information that was provided. My reservations about the technical report are based on the observations I made on site and not necessarily the mapping, which I think their comments were about. So my reservations were that when I looked at the property, I, on 2 occasions, so back in summer of 2020 and now this summer, we have site photos that show wet areas towards the rear of the property. And in the environmental report, they did analysis on site to look at soil conditions and vegetation, and they determined no wetlands on site. They weren't able to do the same standard of review off-site and noted that they saw no standing water. So to me, when I saw that, obviously I'd seen standing water, so I questioned. So are your conclusions the same if there is standing water? And that's where kind of things we didn't see eye to eye on. I think that when you're in the adjacent land area around a wetland and you're looking at whether or not you have access to do the proper investigation on adjacent lands, you have to take a precautionary approach. If on one occasion you're seeing wet areas and part of the definition of a wetland is temporary or seasonally wet areas, then I think you have to consider that it could be a wetland. So that's all I was doing. And I was basically providing, questioning some of the conclusive nature about the technical report for the off-site locations and just advocating for a precautionary approach in lieu of having to do a peer review. So if we have a technical report that's submitted that we have questions about, we can do a peer review on it at the cost of the applicant. So in lieu of that, what I was suggesting is that we just advocate for a more precautionary approach. And I think what we started with was there's an off-site wetland shown in the provincial or the official plan. It's if you put a 30-meter buffer on it, which our official plan requires, then it overlaps a significant portion of the rear yard, and the septic system location is brought into question. So, in lieu of requiring a 30-meter, we suggested, why don't we use a 20-meter in this instance, and a 20-meter, if I show my screen, a 20-meter buffer on the wetland would basically mean that the rear 5 meters of the lot should be off limits to development. And that's what we put forward as a precautionary approach in lieu of doing a peer review. So my difference of opinion is just based on the fact that there wasn't the same offsite work done to make a conclusion about whether or not there's a wetland in that area. And so I advocated a precautionary approach.
Okay, I appreciate your comments for sure. I have one quick follow-up to that. Is this the 120 meters that you referred to? Or we just approved 3 lot creations for the Hares Madden application. And what we're asking for in this application, is that consistent with what we did with those 3 lots? Because they had exactly the same, their proximity to very significant wetlands. Is this consistent with what we required there?
Yeah, so basically, whenever you're in an adjacent land area to a
Right.
wetland, it triggers a concern and a need for study.
Right.
So in that application, we asked for an environmental impact study to look at those wetlands and to recommend an appropriate buffer. And they recommended a buffer of 30 meters. So it's a consistent approach that we'd use on any lot creation adjacent to a wetland.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. Are there any questions from committee? Councillor Armour?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, are all the lots along there have that buffer away from the wetland? Because I'm sure it just doesn't buff up to that one piece of property.
No, that's a good question. So I don't think they have a buffer, but I think what we're dealing with today is an application to create a new lot. And if we're creating a new lot that's deficient in area, we had to look at, if there's any constraints. And one of the constraints was this wetland. So we're recommending this buffer to protect it. But I think the lot has been the rest of the lots have been there for some time. So probably not the same policy framework in place. So they wouldn't have those buffers. When we're dealing with the development with the current policies, the OP says that you're supposed to maintain a 30-meter buffer from wetlands unless you do a technical report to identify the location of that wetland and recommend an appropriate buffer.
Okay. Councillor Armour, if that's good. Okay. All right. I don't think did I read the motion? I'm sorry, I am confused for a minute. Did I read the motion? So maybe at this point I will read the motion, just so you know what we're considering. Moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Armour. It is recommended that the Planning Committee approve the zoning bylaw amendment application Z15 2020 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to rezone the lands from a residential 1 zone to a residential 1 zone with an exception and a residential 1 zone with an exception, as outlined in attachment number 2 to this report, both to create 1 new residential lot. So if I am correct, you're recommending approval of the application, Richard, and that your approval requires the buffer at the rear as well as at the side, which is what you were referring to, Savis, right? That there's some concern about that buffer. So, Councillor Stone.
Yeah, I just want to say there seems to be a disconnect here, and Savis makes some good points. It doesn't seem necessary to have the 5 meters at the back and the 3 meters on the side. However, I don't know that the applicant's going to be building within those areas anyway. So is it much of a concern, Savis? Can I ask that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The lot is developable with those buffers. I just felt I needed to raise the issue because we're buffering is from something that has been demonstrated by a qualified professional that's not there. So.
But it certainly, and your client is satisfied with the direction if there's approval.
He will take this over nothing, if that's what you're asking.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions? Seeing none, I am going to call the question, and all those in favor of the motion that's before us. And I don't see Councillor Fitzgerald. Okay, there we go. So that is unanimous. And Savis, thank you for all of the work on that. It was appreciated. It's part of the discussion. And Richard as well.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, last item. Richard. I'm not even saying what it is. It's a site plan approval. I'll let you
Okay,
do.
I'm just going to share my screen. So thank you, through you, Madam Chair. This application is site plan application 36, 2021. And the subject property is located at the intersection of East Elliott Street and Wilmont Street. The lands have an approximate area of 1,844 meters squared with 35.94 meters of frontage on Wilmont Street. The lands are zoned Main Street West mixed use area and are designated mixed use in the official plan. The lands are also within an an intensification corridor per the official plan. The site plan application is for the construction of a 2-story, 10-unit multiple dwelling apartment building with a total ground floor area of 429 meters squared. The units are intended to be rental units and will consist of 4 2-bedroom units and 6 1-bedroom units. Official plan policies related to the mixed use designation and the intensification corridor encourage development that will contribute to the well-being and cohesiveness of the community and anticipate high density residential uses with a maximum permitted density of 60 units per gross hectare. In this case, the density falls just below the allowed density, and it's noted that the built form is such that it appears to be consistent with the Main Street development, as well as it becomes a lower profile facade along East Elliott, which is consistent and speaks to the lower density residential on the south side of East Elliott. And I can show you that in the elevations. So lower profile along East Elliott and a 2-story elevation along on the north side of the building. These are renderings of the building, so you can see what it would look like. This is looking at the building from the north. And this is looking at the building from East Elliott. Some site photos to see what the site looks like under existing conditions. So the site plans submitted in support of this development may require minor revisions to address concerns respecting the proposed storm water management facilities, which are still being reviewed by our operations department. And those revisions will be required prior to final approval. Landscape plans should be revised to replace sod with shrub and tree plantings wherever possible, particularly in areas along streets to enhance streetscape. Snow storage areas should also be identified on the plans. District comments, which are contained in attachment 7 to the report, indicated no major concerns exist, but provided comments respecting provision of municipal water services, which are to be extended to a water meter and a heated locked utility room. So the plans need to be revised to address those comments, unless that's already on them, and that will be confirmed. Comments have been received from building relating to fire access, and it's noted that due to the existing road elevations and grade, emergency access may be limited and not meet the requirements of the building code. To address this concern, town staff requested that the applicant provide a detailed fire access route, noting the existing and proposed grading, and it may be necessary to install sprinklers within the building in lieu of full fire access route. No other comments or objections have been received. The application appears to conform to the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and staff are recommending approval of the site plan application, subject to conditions to address outstanding matters noted in the report. And any requested revisions from relevant review agencies. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Richard, for that. I understand that the applicant's agent, I know that John Gallagher, I believe, had suggested he wanted to speak to this briefly, or?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do see that Mr. Gallagher's hand is raised. So as the agent, I'll move him into the meeting now.
Afternoon. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible.
Please do, John. It's the,
Yeah.
if it's, staff are recommending approval. So if there's additional information that we have to hear, then absolutely, please go on.
Yeah. The site plan meets all the requirements of the zone for which it is existing. It's only 23% coverage where 35 is allowed. The height of the building is 5.5 meters where 11 meters is proposed. We did provide from the architect the comments with respect to the fire route. It fronts on municipal
John,
roads.
you're going in and out. I don't know if you're moving away or something from your speaker, but periodically you kind of.
So did you get the height? The height was 5.5 instead of 11 meters.
Right, okay.
And we did provide from our architect the answers respecting the fire access route that was provided. And we did provide all the landscaping plan as shown on the drawings there. And I know that Brandon and Dan Duke are just working out some final details on the super pipe for the stormwater in the parking lot. So it'll all be contained underground in a pipe and then into the municipal service. Glad to answer any questions if you have any. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was brief. Hey, I am going to read the motion. It has been moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Mayor Terziano. I think the mayor, I'm actually going to, yes, still there. Okay. It is recommended that the Director of Development Services approve site plan application SPA 36/2021 HT and that the agreement be prepared to the satisfaction of the town, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign any necessary documentation conditional on 1, all final plans and drawings being to the satisfaction of the town and all other commenting agencies. So with that, I will ask if there are questions of committee. Maybe I could ask one quick one in the very beginning. John, is your client proposing that any of these be affordable? As I think he has built them before, so I was curious.
I think he's had some discussions with the district, but I'm not sure whether he's committed yet. The good part again is there's multiple 1-bedroom units, and I think that's what's going to sort of address a lot of the issues that we're having in Huntsville right now around rentals.
That would be great, and I'm glad that he's having discussions with the district. That's great too. But okay, thanks. Any other questions from committee? I don't see any, so I am going to call the question. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thanks, John, for sticking around and all of that.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Have a great
Right.
day. Bye-bye.
So moving right along, we don't have any new business, nothing under general information. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Armour and seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that we do hereby adjourn at 5:35 p.m. All those in favor? And that's great. That carries too, apparently unanimously. So thank you everybody for putting up with the glitches and for the very, very long meeting.